Hey friends, welcome back to the Autry Benton Show. We have a true legend with us today, Dick Harpootlian. If you lived in South Carolina any period of time, you know who this guy is. He has many fascinating chapters to his life. And he's come out with a brand new book, Dig Me a Grave, which we're going to dig deep into today. We're also going to look at the other chapters of his life, which are very fascinating. I'm very honored to have him here today. He's a longtime Democrat. I'm a longtime Republican. But I think we're going to find we have a lot in common. He loves South Carolina and America, and I do too. In this polarizing society, we got to start talking again if we're going to ever fix the problems of our day. So I am honored to have you here today, Senator.
Well, thank you for having me.
This is a true pleasure. Before we got on the air, I was telling you, and this is the truth, you're one of the finest communicators I've ever heard in my life. Started following you on the Senate floor, and as I described to you, you could tell me this book right here is purple and make people believe it. You're a fine communicator.
Is that a communicator or a BS artist?
I don't know. It's great. It's great. But truly, thank you for this time. I'm honored to be here so much. Thank you. So I want to dive right into this. So tell me where you grew up and a little bit about your early life.
Oh, it's not that interesting, but it is a trip. My daddy was a bomber pilot in World War II, B-17, pre-D-Day, took off from England, went on the first Berlin raids. I mean, this was anyone that knows anything about World War II history. Of the 7,500 B-17s that we sent to England, 5,000 of them went down. They were shot to hell every time they went up. But the idea was to make the German Luftwaffe pull back to protect Germany, get them off the channel, which allowed D-Day to happen. And he actually was after 30 missions in a boat coming back on D-Day. So wow. He did the job. After the war, he met my mom in Nebraska, I think. And they ended up getting married and having a son while he was still, at that point, it became the Air Force. It was the Army Air Corps. Wow. In Tampa, Florida. And then he moved back to Brooklyn, New York, where his mom lived. And he went there and got a job. He ended up getting a job with a small loan company. Back then, there were no credit cards. Banks didn't loan normal people money. So if you're going to get money to buy a refrigerator or a car, car dealerships didn't finance cars. You went to a small loan company, and they typically loaned less than $2,000 or $1,500. And it was a small loan company, and they had 4 offices, but in a matter of a year, they had over 100 offices. And so we moved to Rochester, New York. I was born in Brooklyn, moved to Rochester, New York when I was a year, and we lived there for about 3 years. And as the company expanded, he got transferred. We got transferred to Virginia, where we lived in Falls Church and Fairfax. And then it grew even larger, and we moved to Boston. And we lived in Boston until 1959. In 1960, we moved south because they were expanding in the south at that point, and lived in Charlotte, where I grew up. Wow. From 6th grade forward. Graduated from high school in Charlotte in 1966. Decided I wanted to be a chemical engineer. I was very good at chemistry and math and physics, and went to Clemson in 1966. I also, because of my dad, and ROTC was mandatory at Clemson at the time, was an Air Force ROTC, wanted to be a fighter pilot in the Young Republicans Club. Wow. Very conservative, but my parents were very conservative. Now also remember the South at this point, the schools I went to in Charlotte were all white public schools because we were segregated. I had no black friends. Matter of fact, the only African American I knew well was our maid. And a number of black kids sat on the front steps of our school, our high school, to be bused downtown to the black school. Very, white bathrooms, white water fountains, white restaurants. But, when you're growing up in that environment, if you're not black, if you're white, you just assume that's the way things are. So I got to Clemson in 1966 as a chemical engineering student. Did really well, doing very well. But in the late 1967 and early 1968, the world was changing. My world was changing. Mm-hmm. I went to work on our student newspaper, and I remember this as if it were yesterday. There were some black students, and Clemson by that point had integrated. Harvey Grant, the year before me, became the first black student at Clemson. There were 3 black kids that were brought up to our newspaper office by one of the African American students at Clemson, who this was in February, coming home from SC State. SC State had been shut down, and the reason it had been shut down is that there had been a demonstration, and during the demonstration something went awry, and the National Guard and the Highway Patrol shot and killed 3 students and wounded like 10 others.
Wow. At South Carolina State?
SC State in February 1968. It became known as the Orangeburg Massacre. We actually use that headline in our story about what happened. Most people don't remember it, know about it, but you know what those kids were demonstrating about? No. They wanted to go bowling at the all-white bowling alley. They wanted to go bowling. 3 of them lost their lives and 10 got seriously wounded. A number of the kids, their wounds were in the bottom, buckshot in the bottom of their feet. The only way you get buckshot in the bottom of your feet is if you're laying down. It was horrendous.
Yeah.
So that was in February, and it began sort of a re-examination in my mind of what's going on, what's this society about. I went to a United States Student Press Association meeting in Washington where I heard just extraordinary stories about Vietnam. There's a guy named Gene McCarthy who was running for president, United States Senator, who indicated the war in Vietnam was something we shouldn't be doing and explained why, and it made some sense to me. But still, I was still in ROTC and still not questioning that so much. Then in April, Martin Luther King was shot and killed, and his funeral was in Atlanta, and several of us went down to participate, see, observe that. 500,000 people showed up. And I marched from Ebenezer Baptist Church to Morehouse with that crowd and saw all kinds of people that day, celebrities and otherwise. But what came across to me was the sense of sadness, the sense of loss, and I really wasn't that familiar with Martin Luther King, but I heard at Morehouse them play his speeches and how inspiring they were. I saw Bobby Kennedy that day, and he was inspirational. And I came back and immediately signed up to help him in his presidential campaign. In June, he shot and killed in Los Angeles, sort of dashed our hopes. In August, the Democratic Convention in Chicago turned into a riot. The Democratic Party nominated, because LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, had not run again. The seat was open. They nominated Hubert Humphrey, which was a disaster. And Richard Nixon won. Richard Nixon, who, by the way, ended up establishing the EPA, reaching out and having a relationship with China, doing a number of things that today you might consider liberal.
Right. So,
but for Watergate, he might have been a pretty decent president. Yeah. But as I got engaged in politics, my interest in chemical engineering, which is, by the way, if you're an engineer or studying engineering, that's a 7-day-a-week, 18-hour-a-day vocation, especially back then, no computers. So any calculations you're doing with a slide rule. And I invite your viewership to look that up. It's right up there with abacus. It's
no chat GBT for that.
No chat GBT, no electronics. So I decided, and with the newspaper, became, you might consider it liberal. I was against the war, for civil rights. And civil rights back then meant something different than it does today.
Absolutely.
I mean, it was people fighting to eat at that restaurant, or to use that water fountain, or to have their children to have the same educational opportunity as the white kids. It was a very tumultuous time. They did not integrate the schools where I went in Charlotte until 1972. case called Swan versus North Carolina. So it was a developing situation. Everything was new, everything was different. And the background of that was Woodstock, long hair, drugs, weed. I don't know whether, I mean, it was nothing.
Lots of different terms for it.
Right. But I mean, it was a much more, the late 60s were a very different time, mentally, psychologically, politically, philosophically. But it changed me into somebody that was interested in getting engaged in society, not sitting in a laboratory somewhere, but engaged. And so when I got out of, when I was getting ready to graduate, I wasn't ready to go to work, so I went to law school. And I got married and went to law school here at Carolina. And my senior year in law school, a couple of things had happened. One, a bunch of the folks from the student newspaper at Clemson came down here, and we started what was very much not a fad, but very, very prevalent practice around the country. We started what was called an underground newspaper. It's called Osceola here. The Atlanta had the Great Speckled Bird. The Boston had the Real paper. The San Francisco had the Phoenix. I mean, they were papers that were alternative papers. Now, to put that in context, the daily papers in Columbia, virtually every town, there was a morning paper and an afternoon paper, the State and the Record. In Charlotte, it was the Charlotte Observer and the Charlotte News. I mean, so you had plenty of papers, and this was an alternative view to that. And while working for that paper in my senior year, a young man named Jim Anders, who was in his 32, 33, 34, probably 34, came by our office and said he was going to run against the incumbent solicitor, a guy named John Ford, who'd been solicitor for 24 years. And he disagreed with Ford because of Ford's very, I say conservative, almost reactionary efforts to shut down any sort of anti-war effort in Columbia. There was, Fort Jackson was the major basic training facility for Vietnam on the East Coast. And so there were coffee houses where they counseled draftees and a number of other things that were going on. So Ford was not particularly well liked by people of my age. Anders was running against him on a number of different issues, mostly involving the efficiency of the office. We met with him. I did an interview with him and with John Ford. And I ran into Ford on the street the next week. Obviously, I was not as kind to him as I was to Anders. And he said, "Boy, I hear you're in law school." I said, "Yes, sir, I am." He said, "Well, when you graduate, you better find another town to practice in."
Oh, wow.
I said, "Well." So I went to Anders and said, "What can I do to help you?"
He convinced you that day, didn't he?
And I helped him write some ads, helped him strategize a little bit, and he won.
Wow.
And he offered me a job. I already had a job with legal aid lined up, and legal aid was going to pay me $8,800 a year, which was not bad money in 1974. Anders said, "No, you need to come work for me." I said, "I don't want to be a prosecutor." I had hair down over my shoulders. I may have smoked more than cigarettes at the time, and just said, that's not the lifestyle I want. I said, "And that system needs changing." He said, "Well, if you come with me, you can help me change it from the inside. And I'll pay you $10,500.
Sounded good.
So that's what I did. And I didn't think I was going to like it, but that jury trial process, I tried my first case on January 15th, 1975. The day we were sworn in, it was an armed robbery case. And I was intrigued by not only the process, but the ability to perform in front of 12 people.
Yeah.
And in a way that convinced them, you could convince them and advocate for your position. And I got a conviction. Now, I've lost a bunch of cases. I'm not telling you I've, won every case I've ever tried. But I got the bug. And in August of that year, I tried my first death penalty case.
Wow. Can I ask you two questions
Sure.
before we go into that? The early part of your life brought two questions in my mind. What age did you leave Boston to move to Charlotte, roughly? It doesn't have to be.
10.
Do you remember living in Boston?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. What segregation, as you mentioned so so much part of the South. Did you see that in the North?
No. Well, by the way, I saw no black people in the North.
Okay.
I mean, the difference is we lived in a suburb of Boston.
Yeah.
I can't remember ever seeing a black person.
Okay.
Now, when I got to the South, there were black people everywhere.
Right.
They just weren't in our churches, in our schools, in our restaurants. Anywhere we went, they weren't there. They were on the street, working in the yard, waiting on us. I don't think they even waited on us in a restaurant.
Wow.
So, no, they were everywhere. They just were not part of our society. They were not.
It was brand new to you coming to
Segregation?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Wow.
I mean, it was. But I still didn't appreciate the fact they were being denigrated, that they weren't being allowed equal opportunity. I mean, I'm a 12-year-old kid. I mean, I'm just not. That's the way it is. You just sort of accept it.
Right.
Only once I got off at college, and began being aware. And remember now, right now, you can pick up your phone and get all the information you want about any subject.
Right.
There were 3 television networks. You had your home paper. I mean, the New York Times, I'm sure it was a great paper for New York, but you didn't get the New York Times in Charlotte, North Carolina, or Columbia, South Carolina. And you couldn't get anything electronically. So your access to information, and you don't think the local newspapers were editorializing against segregation. So only when you watch the national news about what they were doing in Selma or what they were doing elsewhere did you begin to get a glimpse. And by the way, what 15, 16-year-old kid goes home and watches the news?
True, yeah.
So, I mean, it was only when I got to college that I began to realize the world's different than I thought it was.
Yeah. And my second question is, you talked about your father, which, thank you for his service, served our country, war hero, greatest generation, and your ideas, obviously, they were different. How did that conversation go when you were weighing the things of Vietnam and what was going on in the world, and having a father who'd given so much?
My dad obviously believed, I mean, he had a broken ankle, and so he couldn't be drafted. And he volunteered. And finally, in late 1942, they took him because they were out of people. They were going to take a kid with a bum leg and make him a pilot. He never thought Vietnam was a war we should be fighting, because the war he fought was to liberate people that wanted to be liberated from folks that invaded them. And unfortunately, Vietnam was, I mean, I got to know a lot about Vietnam, and he read a lot about it. Vietnam was a French colony. And when the Japanese came in World War II, they threw the French out. The Vietnamese fought very, very strongly under Ho Chi Minh to be liberated from the Japanese, and worked with the Chinese. After World War II, the Vietnamese communicated to the United States, we don't want to be a colony anymore. We want independence like you. You got independence from the British, we want independence from the French. And we did not reciprocate. And as a result, the Vietnamese fought the French, beat them at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. But Ho Chi Minh, I had a guy one time who was with CBS News who spent time in Vietnam and China in World War II. He said Ho Chi Minh was their George Washington. He liberated them from the French. But we were allied with the French.
Yeah.
So it was more complicated, a lot more complicated than Hitler invading France.
Yeah. So you and your dad really didn't...
We didn't dispute about that. And he did not want me putting myself in danger in that war.
Yeah. Well, thank you for answering that question. So you get a job at the solicitor's office, and you get your first win.
Right.
And bring me back to where you were, your first capital case.
Guy, it's in the book, Thomas Earl Rogers had shot and killed a woman at a huddle house out here on Forest Drive when he complained about it, how his eggs were cooked. She said, you'll eat them the way I fixed them. Yeah. And he got upset, went out, got a gun, came back in and shot her. Now, back then, I picked a jury on Monday morning at 10. He was sentenced to death at 2 o'clock on Tuesday afternoon. That would not happen today because of a case called Furman versus Georgia from the U.S. Supreme Court saying that process was unconstitutional. And his sentence was commuted to life. Back then, life meant eligible parole in 10 years. So I really didn't understand the impact of what I was doing because it never really got done. You know what I mean? Okay. It was no real expectation he was going to be executed. I prosecuted probably 10 or 12 more death penalty cases with Anders. None of them ever got the death penalty till we got to Pee Wee. Can
I read that line in your book, in your foreword, if I can? It says this: how does a fierce opponent of capital punishment become someone who puts a serial killer to death by electrocution? You were weighing the things of life again, going into this. Tell me about that. You shifted again, not shifted, but something was going on.
Well, you know, I pride myself on examining. I mean, this blind following a position because it's always been your position, or following a line of logic because that's always been the line of logic. I want to re-examine. Do I want to strap somebody into a chair and literally fry them to death? Yeah. No. Anybody that relishes that thinks that's an appropriate act of society, there's something wrong with them. Now, are there circumstances in which you have to do that to protect society? It's an act of self-defense. And the answer is yes. Pee Wee is the prime example of that. Now, as a senator, I introduced a bill to give the inmate the option of the firing squad because I felt that was more humane. Mm-hmm. And it passed, and 2 or 3 inmates have chosen that. But killing somebody is not something we should relish, not something that we should look forward to. It is the last act of society to protect itself. Mm-hmm. And that's the way I applied it when I was solicitor, and that was my call. Wow.
But you said you had tried several cases before Pee Wee and before, and as you describe in the book, you know, your full logic or your thoughts on the penny opened up. Was it, and we're in the next episode, we're going to get deep into the book, but was it pretty early on you came to that, how evil this man was?
Oh, Pee Wee? Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, before I ever knew Pee Wee, I'd read about the 13 murders he had previously committed, and was appalled. But legally, they could not have gone for the death penalty on those 13. So when it ended up in my lap in September of '82, I said, he gets 13 life sentences, opportunity even for parole, and he, not for money, not for revenge, not in anger, but plots to execute a guy, assassinate a guy on death row. If not him, who?
Yeah. Yeah. And so you knew about him. So that's when you come into the picture. And I'm getting ahead of the book here. Is that when you were introduced, was after the death of Tyner's death?
Yes. Tyner, initially it was thought that Tyner had blown himself up trying to escape. When we found out, the FBI found out it was C4 plastic explosive. Yeah, that sort of went out the window. Yes, no, right after Tyner's death, there was a full press on figuring out what happened. A guy named Al Waters, chief investigator at CCI, Central Correctional Institute, Department of Corrections, figured it out, got the tapes, got statements from inmates, and put a case together. That was in the fall of '82. Hell, we tried him in the spring of '83.
Wow. Okay, and before we go into the book, Dig Me a Grave, you know, you're at the solicitor's office, you're enjoying it. You've won some cases, your life, your mindset shifted a little bit. You're dealing with some of the most hardened criminals on earth. Tell me about your personal life there. Are you married at this point?
I'm married. Kids? I'm married. I don't have a child. My child was born in 1987. So no kids. My wife had an import-export business. She was traveling overseas a good bit. Life was great. Working hard, doing what I like doing. Around lawyers, the lawyers not only in my office, but lawyers I'd gone to law school with that were in private practice. Jack Swirling, who went to Clemson with me, ended up representing Pee Wee. see him on social occasions. And others, Dennis Bolt, Joe McCullough, Steve Brown, all these people that I've known for years and years and years. But life was good, and I felt like we were affecting the quality of life in our community. And that's an important part. With this caveat, when you're a prosecutor, you don't gauge your success by wins. You gauge your success by ensuring that you're prosecuting somebody that you have the evidence to convince a jury beyond a reasonable doubt committed the crime. There's an old saying, better 100 guilty men go free than one innocent man get convicted. And you've got to take that approach, not because you're trying to help defendants, but because for this system to work, you can't cheat. And it's very easy for a prosecutor to cheat. Withhold evidence, coach a witness. I mean, there's a million ways to do it. And there are a bunch of prosecutors out there, not a bunch, but there are more than there should be, that cheat. And nobody that ever worked for me or with me cheated and kept their job.
I got you. In less than 2 minutes here, at this point, your overall view of the judicial system as it is at South Carolina, coming in a new prosecutor, did you believe in it? Did you think it was a good system? Did you see problems? What was your take of the whole system at this point?
Well, I think the system was very inefficient. The system when I came in 75 was the way it had been for 50 years, 60 years, longer. It had to change, and it has changed since 1975. The process has changed. How we pick judges changed. The funding has changed. It's still got a ways to go, but I mean, for the times, it seemed fundamentally fair.
Okay.
There were judges who I would not want to be in front of, who had predilections, maybe racist predilections, maybe sexist predilections, or just were mean. I mean, you know,
there's mean people everywhere.
There's mean people everywhere, and there are judges who were just mean. So no, but it's changed dramatically with merit selection and all the screening and review. Judges have gotten a lot nicer. I'm not sure sometimes if they're not too nice.
Right, I got you. Well, good. Well, great. Well, Senator, so in the next episode, we're going to talk a little bit more about Dig Me a Grave and dig in on who Pee Wee Gaskins is. So I knew this interview that you're going to be fascinating, and sitting down here with your time, you've been so gracious, but I think I could spend a day with you and not crack just a picture of your life, what we got there.
Well, I'll lose my voice.